Aloha. Welcome to podcast season 2, people. On Light Diamond Creative YouTube channel. You can check out Light Diamond Creative on Instagram. It's also branded across Venmo and Cash App. You know why. And today we're on episode 7 so that we can continue talking about the awakening journey. And I'm sharing my own awakening journey to hopefully give you information that might serve you along your own awakening path. Today, now we're really getting in. This is getting pretty intense here, so I just want to give you that heads up. We're really diving deep and getting into the subjects that not a lot of people talk about because it's difficult to talk about it. It can be difficult. So I hope that you are seated or doing, I don't know, doing something that makes you feel good. Maybe you're driving in the car while you listen to this. I don't know. But I know that these perspectives and these stories have a lot of gold nuggets in them. And that is why I'm sharing them as the earth at large goes through its grand awakening process. The process of not knowing to knowing. The process of naivety to understanding. Awakening to the fullness of the reality around us as well as within us. And in this episode, we continue to talk about Ben, and he will not be the subject of every part of my awakening journey, but this guy was the real beginning of my awakening process. And in this episode, we are talking about awakening to death. Oh, I know it sounds so hard, but something that we will be talking about, and I'm just going to touch on it right now. First of all, the relationship we have with death. We can even ask ourselves, what's the relationship that I have with death? I would say that most people within the United States are not in good relationship to it. Now, how do you even get in a good relationship with death? All right, we'll go there. So, in our culture, we are terrified of death. This is just my observation. Feel free to accept or reject, but through my observations, I have concluded that at large, within these so-called United States, we are terrified to die. And we are such a largely Christian society that it's worth questioning how that may lead to us having such a poor relationship with death. In the Christian perspective, when you die, you either go to heaven or you go to hell. And I can see how that would cause a lot of fear, because if hell is an eternal pit of fire, I wouldn't want to go there either, But then when it comes to the reasons of how you avoid getting there and how you go to heaven, that's where I think the Christians have a lot of stuff mixed up, It's important to illuminate that this will not apply to all Christians. However, the programming of Christianity has been used to manipulate people by telling them what is a way of getting to heaven and how to avoid hell. Avoiding hell by not being gay, for example, which I just totally do not align with that Christian perspective at all. So, yes, it's understandable why we would be so afraid of death, because really Christianity is the main influence on our perspective about it, because we're so afraid of it culturally that within the family and within the community, we really don't talk about it, even when someone does die. What I invite all of us to do is to maybe explore some other perspectives of death, or maybe explore what you think about death without the influence of these bombarding I don't know how to say, uh, rules of this Christian influence. But what is the deal? What's the deal with death? Okay. In my perspective at this point, it is a phase change, a change of state, exiting one state, the physical, and entering into a gaseous state, if you will, becoming spirit, becoming energy without the case, the physical vessel of the body. That's something I think now. Now it's much further down the road than when I experienced my first relationship where it ended in death. I did not feel this way then. And so I do want to be very as gentle as I can with people in talking about it, because it is really difficult to experience someone who you love die. It can be very challenging, especially if we do not have a good relationship with death. You know, if we think that people just go away and they're either in heaven or hell according to what someone else says, then it can be really tough. It can be tough to even live and think, well, if I do this action, I'm going to hell. It's a lot to navigate, okay? And it is difficult, you know, having that physical separation and knowing that a person will not return physically in this lifetime, that is hard. And it is part of the awakening journey, because everything on earth dies. It lives and it dies. This is something that all of life shares, the cycle of life and death, the cycle of becoming and undoing. Now, let's bring it back around to our friend Ben. In the last episode, we touched on addiction and the use of drugs and substances due to a need to feel better. In his position of suffering from PTSD, in his position of being mentally and emotionally unstable, which someone who knew Ben would probably be like, I don't know if he was mentally unstable, because the guy was freaking brilliant. You know, there are a lot of grays in here. He was brilliant, and he did suffer from mental illness. And I know this because he told me. And not that he said, I suffer from mental illness. No, he said while we were in a relationship together a few months in, that he had suicidal thoughts and that he had attempted to kill himself not long before he and I met and became friends. And so that is mental illness, being at the point of wanting to harm the self and take one's life. So he was having a hard time, more than a hard time. And I will share part of our journey together, Martha and Ben, as we were falling in love and as he dealt with major mental and emotional issues. I remember him telling me that he had been addicted to heroin before. And I remember when he told me that, I didn't really know what to say, because, again, I had been so naive to the world of drugs as someone who didn't ever use them except for alcohol in college. And I remember when he told me that he had been addicted to heroin, I just wanted to hug him and hold him and do what I could to help him feel better. And I also did not understand physiological addiction, and I did not understand the severity of being addicted to a substance like heroin. So when he told me that he had been addicted to heroin, I never thought that he would relapse. That never entered my mind. Not really, because he said he was okay. He said he would never go back to that. And so then there came to be the time when he was telling me, this was on December 31st, 2016, in the evening. We were getting ready to have friends over and have a New Year's Eve party. And I remember that evening, he said he was having a hard time. He said, I'm having a hard time. I want to use heroin. And I didn't know what to do. I mean, I was a naive 25. I just turned 25, and I loved him, and I took him into the room that we stayed in, and we just laid down together, and we put on some soothing music. I held him, I hugged him, I pet him. We stayed there for hours until he said that he finally felt better. And then we got up and we went about our evening, which was to prepare for our friends to come over so that we could have a good time and build a fire. And it gets tough, people. Okay, so hold on to your hats. So we continue into New Year's Eve. We had decided, even if he was having that hard time, we wanted friends to come over. And so friends came over, we started having a good time. And I was with Ben and our friends outside around a fire that we had built together. And I'm listening to one of my friends tell me a story about something. I don't remember now. This was in, 2016, 17, New Year's Eve and day. And I'm listening to the story from our friend when all of the sudden, all of the alarms in my body go off. Where's Ben? Where's Ben? I don't know where he is. He's not in the backyard with us. I'm just getting red alerts, red alert, red alert, like my body is a siren and it's telling me, go find Ben. And I'm such a nice person because I was like, it's rude if I interrupt my friend's story. He's telling me a story. I don't want to say, hold on a second. So I continue to listen, but then these alarms continue to go off. And I'm like, hey, I stop him. Hey, do you know where Ben is? I haven't seen him. No, I haven't seen him for the last 20 minutes or so. And so I get up and I walk into the house and he's not in the living room. I peek into the room we're staying in. He's not in there. And I look across the hall and the bathroom door is closed. The light is on. So I knock on it. Ben? There's no answer. I grab onto the knob. It's locked. Ben? Knock, knock, Ben? And I hear a wheezing, like a gasp for breath. The door is locked. I'm the only one. The friends are outside. But I heard the wheezing. And so I don't really remember how I got into that door, but I got the door open, a sheer force of will, and Ben was on the ground. This whole experience happened in slow motion. And part of the reason I tell it is to say that when it comes to drugs and addiction, this is definitely not what you would like to experience. However, this is a reality of the road that is synthetic and hard drugs. And so as I walk into the bathroom, and see Ben on the floor, I also notice a spoon, and I notice a needle. It's on the floor next to him. And when I look at Ben, his face is gray and his lips are purple. And it hits me that Ben is dying. And so I drop to the floor and I grab his face and I beg him, "Stay, don't go." I try to kiss him, "Wake up, come back." I screamed for help. I screamed my friend's name who I'd been listening to the story from. "Come help." And Ben hadn't told anyone else that he had been addicted to heroin. He hadn't told our friends who were there. I knew that they didn't know. I knew that they would be shocked because they didn't know that hours earlier, he had told me that he wanted to use. They had no idea. And so the friend who had told me the story when my alarm bells went off helped me drag Ben, 230 pounds of dead weight, out of the bathroom so that we could give him CPR. It was a stressful situation, to say the least. We barely got him out of the bathroom, and our friend was so shocked and frustrated that he punched a hole in the wall. Started to freak out a little bit, and I realized that if we didn't give Ben CPR, he would die right there. And so I said, "Do you want me to do it?" He said, "No, I'll do it." I said, "Okay. Give him compressions to the sound of my voice, and I will count to 4 over and over." Our friend who began administering the CPR was also a physical trainer, is a physical trainer still, and had been taught CPR. I had also been taught CPR through a course I had taken a couple years prior. And so together, we began to give CPR to our friend. And I'm telling you this because this is not the road that you want to go down. You do not want to give CPR to your friend in a life or death situation due to overdose. So we continued to give Ben CPR while another friend called for help, and the EMS came. The EMS wasn't far away. And they came and took over the situation as the professionals, as they should have. And I remember being in so much shock that I couldn't say anything as they got him on the gurney to take him to the hospital. I just had my face in my hands. Another friend was on the couch. A lot of deer in headlights looks. The only thing I could think to say as the EMS started to leave with Ben is, "Can I ride with you? Can I be there with you all in the car and in the hospital? Because when he wakes up, if he wakes up, he's going to be very upset." They said no. I asked again. No, can't ride. Can't ride with them. It's not like in the movies, people. And let me re-emphasize that. When we see harm on TV, when we see war on TV, when we see addiction on TV, when we see overdose on TV, it is not the same as experiencing it in real life. In real life, it is much worse. So we got in the car, the friends got in the car, we took a couple and followed the EMS to the hospital. It was past midnight. Yeah, Happy New Year. And we get into the waiting room, and I vaguely remember someone telling us that this is pretty traditional for New Year's Eve, and that they had been dealing with a lot of people who had overdosed that night, and that happens regularly on a yearly basis for some reason. And then finally, someone comes in to tell us that he woke up, that Ben was awake. And I'm the first person to go see him. I walk past the doors. I'm brought to his room. He's in the hospital bed. His eyes are open. And he is very upset. And I just go to him. I'm crying. We thought we lost you. Holding his face, kissing him. But he is so upset and pissed. There had been fentanyl in the heroin. If you don't know fentanyl, this is like a horse tranquilizer, and a little does a lot. And he tells me, as he continues to suffer from mental illness and being in his position, which is very vulnerable at that point in time, he says to me, after I say, well, he says, where are our friends? And I say, they're outside. They want to see you. And he says, tell them they're not allowed to come back here unless they have a gun. And he said a thing or two else about wanting to kill himself and being in a state of suicide. And so I left the room for a moment. I told him I'd be back, and I found the nearest doctor. I said, he's suicidal. What do we do? He says he wouldn't want anybody to come back into the room unless they have a gun. And the doctor tells the nurse, and clearly the doctors and nurses are exhausted from having to deal with these types of situations, from compassion fatigue. And the nurse says, well, he didn't say anything to me. And she goes into the hospital room and asks Ben, are you having suicidal thoughts? Are you saying suicidal things? And if you knew Ben, you know that the man was very stubborn, very defensive, and even defiant. He did not like being asked that question. And when she asked him if he had suicidal thoughts or statements, he lied and said, no, I don't. And I left the room again. Our friends went back. I left the room again so I could talk to a nurse. And I said, but he said to me, he wouldn't tell that to you. He doesn't trust you. He said it to me that he is feeling suicidal. He said for no one to come back into that room unless they have a gun. And the nurse said, well, if we don't witness that, if we don't hear that, we are not allowed to keep him. And so Ben was released. And we all got in the cars as he had been resuscitated completely. And we went home. The party's over, obviously. And the friends who had come over went back to their apartment. The friend who we were living with goes back to his room. And Ben and I go to ours and get in the bed. And I had not ever felt that way before. That I needed to stay up all night in order to make sure that this guy didn't go off himself. Who I loved. I was awake all night long. I did not sleep a wink. And for a while, he didn't either, but eventually he did find sleep. And when dawn broke, I called his parents. And I said that he had had a near-death experience, an overdose from drugs. Now, he hadn't been in as much communication with his family, and they definitely didn't know this side of him, and it was shocking to learn that he had been in the hospital the previous night. They came down, and as they were on their way, not even as they were on their way down, I was still on the phone with them out on the patio. I didn't know what to do. What does somebody do to help someone they love not want to kill themselves and not overdose on heroin? How does somebody even help another person do that when the situation is already so dire? Ben caught me on the phone. I told him, I'm on the phone with your parents. They're on their way down. And he was livid. He was so angry with me for calling them. But I needed help and I didn't know what to do. And so they came down and visited and took us to lunch so that we could talk. And I remember totally falling apart in front of his parents to Ben as I begged him never to do that again because I could not see that again. If I ever saw anything like that again, I would fall apart and die. So we stayed together. I told my parents too. And they were 1,200 miles away. I'd been in Florida for most of the year. I'd been gone before that in North Carolina. I called them and told them what happened. But I didn't even mean to tell them. I didn't want to betray Ben. He was so betrayed by me telling his parents. I didn't want to tell my parents because I was afraid Ben would get mad at me. But then I was on the phone with them just in a casual conversation. I ended up having to pull over because I was so distraught. I just broke down crying. And I told them what had happened. And they recommend getting out of there. Got to get out of there. I said, I can't leave him. And eventually they invited us to come up and live with them while Ben rehabbed. But Ben didn't want to do that. He's too stubborn, too afraid. afraid of getting better, afraid of being without those drugs that he needed. And he did need them. You know, when there are certain drugs involved with our lives, in order to get off of them, we need professional help because our bodies have become so physiologically dependent on that substance. It has reached a new homeostasis to account for the regular influx of that substance, of that puzzle piece, and withdrawing the puzzle piece causes serious responses and reactions within the body. He did need it. He did need all of those drugs in order to stay balanced. But that's a pretty slippery slope. And one can't stay on it forever. So we stayed in Florida and we stayed in the house. It felt like walking on eggshells. I didn't want to do anything that would upset him. I didn't want to overwatch him even. I didn't want to be paranoid. I wanted to practice trust with him again, and we talked about that. We actually came to an agreement where he would leave the bathroom door open when he was in the bathroom, even if he was taking a shit, you know, because I needed to know that he wasn't injecting heroin. And so that was our agreement. Leave the bathroom door open every time you're in there. He would also walk up to me sometimes and ask me if I wanted to feel through his pockets to make sure if that would make me feel better, to know that he didn't have any substances on him. But when he did that, I said, no, I don't want to check you like that. I just want to know that you're committed to not going down that road anymore. And he really tried. He really tried. He did. He gave it a good effort. And we would run a lot. We were actually in the process of training for a half marathon in the January following his overdose. So we would go on runs and around the neighborhood. One time we went all the way up to 7 miles. That was the longest run of my life. And on one of our runs, you know, we were talking, and he, despite the overdose and all of that situation, he still was brilliant. And I loved listening to him. And so in this run, we were almost back to the house. He stopped in his tracks. Something I said, I don't know. Stopped in his tracks, turned around and faced me. I stopped in my tracks and looked at him. And he said, I'm thinking about going to a support group. I just gave him a hug. I just hugged him and held on to him for as long as I could. I was so relieved that he came to his own independent decision of potentially asking for help and asking for support in a professional setting. He had told me he would never go to rehab. He would never go to rehab because apparently that's where you just learned how to do more drugs in different ways. That's what he said. That's why he said he wouldn't go. But he thought about going to a support group, and I just hugged him. I just hugged him so long. And I told him I was glad. I was glad he was thinking about getting support. He didn't. He didn't go. And finally, one day after walking on eggshells for so long, and we had actually started to write letters to each other back and forth that we would read every night, because I asked him, you know, what can I do? What is it that would help you feel better? And he said writing. If I wrote him letters, daily, nightly letters. And he got a book too. And so we made it a practice in January following that event to write to each other daily and read them at night together. We had all of these letters from the 25 days in January. that were in these little books. And then there came one day when things to me felt so weird. I had already felt like I was about to lose my mind because the situation was so difficult. And this day felt so weird. He was so high and so low. He oscillated so quickly between them that it scared me. I remember him jokingly yelling really loud, and it broke me because I was at such a fragile state that I just started crying. I was like, please stop doing that. Stop. And then, it brought him down and he started feeling bad. And I reached out to the friend in the house to say, hey, can you come get groceries with us today? Because I feel a little freaked out with his behavior. Will you come with us? But our friend was taking a nap. He didn't get it. And we needed to go ahead and get groceries because it was getting dark. It was time to eat. So Ben and I went to the store and came back. I made us spaghetti. At this point in time, I was eating meat, no judgment. It's just I'm remembering the dish. I made spaghetti and meatballs and I think some toasted bread, garlic bread. And we're sitting down at the table, the three of us. And I had already observed a couple behaviors earlier in the day. I remember being outside and Ben left to go into the bathroom and I heard him flush 2 or 3 times, but I was trying not to be paranoid. I was trying not to overwatch him. And so I just kind of let that go. I tried not to worry about the multiple flushings happening in the bathroom. And we sat down for this dinner and Ben picked up his fork and started nodding off. That's a sign, people. If you're witnessing somebody nodding off, that's a symptom of freaking heroin. He started nodding off over his food. He would bring his fork halfway to his face. And my friend and I just watched him doze off over his fork and his head tilt downward. I thought, I'm about to lose it. I'm about to lose my shit. I'm about to go crazy. I don't know what is happening. I don't know what to do about this. He had been in the bathroom an irregular amount of times within a short time period. And so I went in the bathroom as he nodded off over his food to look and see, is there anything? I don't see any needles. I don't see anything going on in here. What do I do? And I go back to the table and he's fine. He's not nodded off. And he goes to the bathroom. And then he, from the bathroom, takes a peanut butter jar and disposes it outside in the outside trash can instead of the inside trash can. I'm about to lose it. I was about to lose it. Highly suspicious behavior. He gets back to the table and he picks up his fork and the inside of his arm is bleeding from a needle. I looked at our friend. He and I were going through this experience together. And I walked out. I walked out to the driveway of the house. It was dark. I called my brother. I said, please help me. I have got to get out of here. My brother bought me a one-way ticket for the next day. Meanwhile, as I sat outside and finished the phone call with my brother, our friend who was there with us for dinner, whose house it was we stayed in, was on the phone with the cops. I couldn't have done it. I'm glad he did, though. And so I walked inside and prepared myself to experience the cops in the house. Ben was outside. He had walked from the table outside to the backyard and was leaning up against the house, smoking a bowl, cannabis. I knew the cops were coming. I didn't want to tell him. I thought it was better to not. I didn't call them. But someone needed to come into this situation and help. And so I asked him if I could have the bowl so I could hide it. I didn't tell him it was so I could hide it, but I took it from him and I hid it under some leaves so that he wouldn't get in any more trouble than he was already about to get into. And the cops came. Ben had sold drugs large scale before, and he was aware of how to present himself so that he wouldn't get in trouble. And his adrenaline must have amped up immediately at the sight of them coming to the backyard, because he stood up like a soldier and put his arms behind his back. And the cops separated us. I went inside to the living room. And they said that because Ben didn't have anything on him and that he didn't appear in any way incoherent, there was nothing they could do. I said, what about the peanut butter jar out there with the needle in it? They said, well, if it doesn't happen while we're on the premises, there's nothing that we can do about it. And I was like, what do you expect me to do? What are we going to do? We just called the cops on him. He's going to be pissed. They were like, we will be around the block if anything else happens. All right. Thanks for your help. So the cops left. I walked outside and sat in the dark on the driveway, my head in my hands. Had no freaking idea what to do. And Ben comes out with his backpack packed. He says, I'm leaving. I'm going to a friend's. Don't follow me. And at that point, I didn't want to. I cared. I loved Ben in that moment and in every moment since starting to love him, but I wouldn't chase him. No way. It was too hard. I couldn't do it. What was I going to do? Follow him down the sidewalk and force him to stay in the room with me? No, I didn't even want to stay in that house. I went to another friend of mine who had no idea what was going on, who I'd been working with, and I asked her if I could stay with her, and I told her about the situation. I did not sleep at all that night. I thought Ben was going to die that night. I thought he would be so mad that he would go and end his life. And so I stayed up all night long, unable to fall asleep. And then daylight rose and I heard from Ben. I was glad he was still alive. So thankful that he was still alive. He said, I'm going to Texas. And at this point, I already had my plane ticket to come back to Arkansas that my brother had gifted me. I said, I'm going to Arkansas. And it turns out that he wasn't ever going to Texas. He was trying to manipulate me into wanting him to stay. I said, I'm going to Arkansas. My plane is this afternoon. I got to get my stuff out of my house. You know, I had a different place I had all my stuff at, but I stayed with Ben all the time, every night since we got together the first time. And so we arranged meeting. He didn't have a car. He would be at the gym where he was training, and he wanted to say goodbye, and I wanted to say goodbye too. You know, I just wanted him to know that I loved him. no matter what was going on. I just wanted to make sure that he heard that again. And so my friend took me to the gym where he worked to say goodbye. And I asked her on the way, I said, if it takes more than 10 minutes, will you please come get me? Ben met me outside. And when I saw him after we parked in the parking lot with my friend, when I saw him, I saw that everything had changed about him. He wasn't himself. He was cold. He was hard. He was curt. He was mean. And I approached him and I hugged him. I just said, I love you. I love you so much. You have no idea how much I love you. And I kissed him. And I held his face in my hands. I said, please remember that I love you. I love you. I love you. And he said, if you leave now, I will go call my guy and overdose at work immediately. The internal space of myself at this point knew that that statement reinforced my need to leave. I would not enable that behavior. And so after he told me that he would do that, I said, again, I love you. Please take care of yourself. I have to go. I have to go. I love you. And my friend had gotten my attention. It had been more than 10 minutes. I said, I gotta go. And I walked to the car to meet her. And I looked back at Ben. And when we made eye contact, he drew his thumb across his throat. And he looked so angry. I gathered my things. I got to the airport. I cried the entire flight. And I got home, and my brother picked me up. And it wasn't until I was safe in Arkansas with my brother that we told my parents what had happened. And I was there in Arkansas for 1 week. And I got the call the day before Ben's 28th birthday that he had overdosed and died. That is the reality of addiction. That is the reality of those hard drugs. It's not like it is on TV, people. It is real, and it stays with you. You will never forget. I know this episode has been tough, but I think there's a lot of lessons in it, and that is why I'm sharing. And for those of us that knew and loved Ben deeply, it was hard to see such a beautiful light go out. And many of us did not know about the severity of his situation. And I'm sure that all of us love him still, and we will never forget him. I wish I had a joke to give you to lighten it up, but I don't. Thanks for listening. And I really haven't talked a lot about it, so it's healing for me to get it out. And we'll continue in the next episode. Peace.